like everything is on. I've got the mic set. I'm not muted. I'm also not muted. I have the wrong screen on it. Probably should have checked that too. One of these days, I'm not going to fuck up the intro. All right. Hey, everyone. I'm Airier. Of course, if you're here, you probably knew that already, because this is a live show. We're going to be checking out Star Wars for Warhammer 40k episode 42, Mortal Fall Part 1. I am definitely streaming exactly on time and in no way, shape, or form an hour and 20 minutes later than I thought it would. Yeah, that's never happened before. Yeah. Don't you just love always being punctual? That would be a nice change of pace. Yep. More importantly, you guys know the deal. There's a link below to the original video, and if I have... I'm not sure I have the right video linked. Mother... I'll fix that later. More importantly, there will eventually be a link in the description to the original video. Otherwise, hit up Fan. He's awesome. And subscribe to him if you haven't already. Let's get just jumped into it. This is the part I usually cut out because that sounds stupid in my head. And even worse out loud. So we're going to jump into the real video now. Ooh, I can hear it now. That's a good change.
Ahsoka walked behind the Imperial prisoner, eyes fixed to
Back
his
to
back,
Farness.
her arms crossed
And the
over
fan is
her
in the chat
chest.
laughing at me. Lovely.
The former Jedi had figured, even before attempting to speak with him, that it would be best if she kept herself out of his sight as much as possible.
Probably. Given
what his initial reaction to her appearance had been, she imagined that he had been virtually programmed to attack anything he saw as alien on sight.
No, I think it was literally programmed, not virtually. Virtually would imply that it wasn't explicitly the case. It was, and also they would love to do it virtually if they could as well. On top of the explicit, it makes it so much easier.
More than that,
she's
however,
clearly right about it.
Ahsoka had learned from her last encounter with an Imperial prisoner that to turn her back on him, even for a second, was an invitation to disaster. A lesson she had already learned once, and which had nearly cost her her life. The memory of that priest pressing his fingers into her face, moments from tearing out her living energy, still haunted her.
Yeah, because they were
His blind
taking the
expression
electricity from her.
burned into her memory like an after image of the sun could be burnt into an eye. She shook her head, collecting herself and focusing again on her current prisoner. She doubted he was nearly as dangerous, but one never knew. The prisoner was older than her, but younger than she would have expected a non-clone soldier to be. So it surprised her just how well indoctrinated he had been, though Ahsoka had to admit that it was becoming clear that he was not the victim of mere brainwashing.
I mean, in 40k, I've been thinking it over. Does it count as brainwashing if it's also accurate? It probably started as brainwashing because early into the Crusades, there probably were alien species that weren't horrible and evil. The Emperor made sure those died. He also made sure the ones that actively were horrible and evil died too, though. That's the thing about 40k. The xenophobia is kind of accurate at the time period, with very few exceptions, because anything that wouldn't deserve it is dead. Then there's the orcs, who, honestly, this is their paradise, so...
The flashes of memory he had shown her unwittingly, and the torrents of his emotions, had all been 100% genuine and honest. She had been doing research on the Paestia, of course, but more and more, she was beginning to think these people had little or nothing to do with that ancient cult.
Oh, she's figuring it out.
Had been thoroughly searched, and they had found several odd scripts and text on him, but none of them seemed to make reference to the Paestia or their goddess.
Goddess? I think Fan mentioned, and other people have told me, that this is an actual group within Star Wars lore. I'm still wondering if it's going to be Fan's big joke that it turns out to be them, and this is still the past. That would technically be hilarious to me, if the big reveal is it wasn't actually a crossover, it's a fusion the entire time. And a fan with too much time mentioned Airier is forgetting the sanctioned Xenos. To be fair, we don't talk about those very much. I thought they weren't so much sanctioned Xenos as technically the person in charge at one point realized they were alien species that weren't actually alien, but kind of like the, what are they? Not the orangutans, but a different name, who are basically orangutans. And Matthew, you said turn up the volume, it's a bit low. Oh, on my end, I'm actually in the red on all my speakers, so I thought it might actually be too high. Huh. I just hit it again. When it comes back, it should be at a better level. Yeah. And unless Fan is talking about the sanctioned Xenos as in the Drukhari who work on the Golden Throne, because that is actually a thing that happens. Yeah. Still kind of weirded out by the fact that that's the group they have actual relations with, but also not surprised in the slightest.
She had them all scanned.
Oh god, I just realized any Drukharian presence of the Emperor is literally an all-you-can-eat suffering buffet that would fill their soul entirely for who knows how long. And considering Slaanesh is siphoning it off, that is literally feeding the Emperor's suffering directly to Slaanesh. That's kind of fucked up.
And while he was unconscious, and then ordered that anything that was not a weapon be put back onto his person, for he would need to seem as normal as possible for her plan to work. Her mind still returned again and again to the origin of these odd human invaders. Unless the pious Dia had been flung out of the galaxy and deposited in a place which closely resembled the Dia's own religious depictions of hell, then it just did not seem likely that they were related.
Again, Fan hasn't said anything about here. He's talking still in the chat about how he's talking about actual alien species. I'm assuming non-thinking ones then that don't need to be killed. And, Eldar race as sanctioned. We don't by mandate have to kill them. Really? I thought the standard approach to Eldar was no. Fix it. And, with very few exceptions, that's probably not a bad idea. I actually like the Eldar. I'm not going to say they probably don't deserve it, Slaanesh, for a good reason. And he hasn't said anything about it being a fusion and not a crossover.
It was in large part because of that Ahsoka was flexing so much patience with this young man, despite how uncooperative he had been after his tirade had exhausted itself. He had just gone back to reciting his name and regiment once he had calmed from his rage, and she had not even been able to squeeze the definition of abhuman out of him afterwards. But the former Padawan had one more trick up her sleeve. Well, two technically, but this first one was the one she was putting most of her faith into. Threatening him with the second was not only something she did not want to resort to, but she doubted it would work, especially
probably for the person he was protecting, and that's not something she wants to do.
Especially after what he had said earlier. It's just around here, she told him, the clones to either side of Farnes helping to guide the restrained imp into the small workshop they had built, one of them leading him with a firm hand on his shoulder.
Workshop?
She was grateful when he did not respond by, again, reciting the same words he had been droning out, instead choosing to look defiant as the doors opened and he was made to step into the cramped, low-lit room. There, a commando named Fixer was working diligently, staying off of his wounded leg at Ahsoka's
His name is Fixer. He must be a sniper.
Orders. He looked up from what he was doing as they entered and nodded at Ahsoka when he saw her. Commander? He affirmed. Don't get up, Fixer. How is it going? She asked as they all filed into the room. It was covered wall to wall with speeder parts and other pieces of vehicles, which had been the primary purpose behind the place before the invasion had begun. Now it had been quickly converted into Fixer's workplace, and his latest project was still before him. The clone shook his head at Ahsoka's words, turning to allow them to see what he had been tinkering with. The servo skull that Rex had shot lay inert on the table, intact, but showing no signs of life. Bofin! Farnes exclaimed, attempting to walk forward but being swiftly yanked back by his shoulder. What the frag do you think you're doing?
Oh wait, it's Bofin? For some reason in my head I was going Boffin the entire time. That's on me. I've heard it before.
The clone to his left scolded. Farnes grit his teeth, angry lines drawing over his face, but Ahsoka intervened, stepping in front of him and raising a hand to forestall any response he was about to have. He balked at her appearance, even as she looked past him and nodded to the clone. It's all right. Let him approach it, she said, and the guard begrudgingly nodded back. Yes, Commander, he said, releasing him. Farnes, hands secured tightly behind his back by binder cuffs.
Oh, is it because she already has a rapport with the skull? If they can bring it on, maybe that would help on her end. That seems like it wouldn't be quite what Fan's aiming for, but maybe it is.
Came forward in a rush. Fixer standing up and away, his hand going to his sidearm as the Imperial stood before the device, eyes darting rapidly.
Smart move.
Bofin? Bofin! the young man said, looking at the
Although he
machine
wouldn't have any idea how
frantically
to
before
fix this.
glaring up at the clone beside him. What did you do to him? He accused, almost spitting the words. Captain Rex, Fixer corrected. Shot your skull droid here with a stun blast. It fried the power packs, keeping it active. I replaced them with energy cells, but the clanker didn't respond or reactivate. He explained. You defiled Bofin with alien technology? Of course he wouldn't wake to that.
The irony being it's probably human technology because that's what most things are.
Farnes spat, shaking his head. Well, when that didn't work, I tried to use some Imperial power packs I'd salvaged from the field. But that didn't work out either. I can't tell what more about this thing is damaged, but in my opinion, this imp clanker is fried, said Fixer, limping back a bit more and addressing his words mostly to Ahsoka. Farnes shook his head in dismay before straightening as a thought struck him. Well, did you apply any sacred oil, or even recite the litany of Second Life? Farnes asked the clone.
Please tell me that this actually works because it's literally a turning on password. It would actually be funny to me if the litany of Second Life was actually a command prompt password done through an audio interface and no one realizes that. Or more specifically, anyone in the Mechanicus who does realize that keeps very quiet because it doesn't sound nearly as cool.
Still glaring angrily at the helmed man. Apply the what? Recite the what? Fixer asked.
Scented oils?
Farnes sighed in exasperation before turning back to Ahsoka, visibly wincing at her appearance again.
But
Xenos,
holding it in.
You want to convince me you're trustworthy, right? He said, obviously harnessing his courage just to voice the words. Ahsoka nodded in response,
I love their
but kept
interaction.
her arms crossed, raising an eyebrow marking at him. Then let me go. Remove these cuffs from my hands right now, he said urgently. Why?
For him,
what
it's
are you
probably
going to
safe.
do? If you try to run or fight, you won't. She started to say, but Farnes shook his head in clear agitation. No, look, I am a trained field tech adept, mostly for APCs, but
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that.
Even I know you can't wake a machine spirit without the proper respects and rituals. I need to see if you...
Oh, this is actually a good example of fan keeping the more mystical aspects of 40k tech, which are very obvious, but played in such a way that it becomes unobvious when you actually have it thrown in your face. I don't know. It almost looks like he's going that way, where there's actually the mystical. It's played very differently between authors in 40k. Some play it up as, 40k ignorance to reality. Others play it up as, it's stupid. So stupid that enough people believe it and it actually became true. It could go either way depending on the author. I'm wondering if fan would actually go with it.
You killed Bofin or just knocked him out. Please, he said, voice insistent, desperate.
Also, I have no idea what you're talking about. I didn't cut out anything that would prove your point in the comments section at all.
Ahsoka thought for a moment, weighing his words and feeling his emotions. Farnes was clearly not trained in how to resist a surface probing, his feelings playing out before the former Jedi like
I mean,
an
you should probably
open
see his
book.
feelings on his face
She
regardless.
sighed, rolling her eyes before nodding her head to one of the clones, who promptly came behind the imp soldier and released his hands. Farnes wasted no time in reaching down to his boots, pulling out something that had been hidden beside his left foot. The clones aimed their weapons at him, but held their fire, though Ahsoka knew better than to caution them away from attacking if needed. Still, she sensed no malice in the action, watching curiously to see what he would do. He withdrew a broken vial which dripped with an oily substance, a substance he flicked over the prone's skull, beginning to speak as he did. The soul of the Omnissiah surrounds thee. The power of the motive force invests thee. The faith of the machine god drives thee.
Dude.
The Emperor endows thee with purpose. Awaken, Bofin, spirit of steel, indebted to man. Awaken! He chanted reverently, closing his eyes as he spoke, his other hand pressed against his heart.
Okay, I don't know why, but a fan with too much time, the person who wrote this, just chimed in with the nails biting emoji in the chat, and now I'm kind of worried. What one of us said something, me or someone in the chat, that made him think, oh, maybe I shouldn't have said that. You know what? I'm not going to say anything because that actually gets a little too creepy, because then he's been known to troll me, so I can't say whether it is or is not the case.
At his words, nothing appeared to happen. The Imperial repeating the litany 2 more times as he continued to flick what little oil his vial had onto the skull. Fixer looked up, and even behind his helmet, Ahsoka could see from the tilt of his head that he thought this was all patently ridiculous.
Yes, but if it works...
Until the lights in the skull's face began to flicker, and the anti-grav unit at its base started to warble and hum. The Imperial leaned back and sighed in heavy relief, watching as the skull floated up, lights flashing.
By the machine god, I awaken once more to do my duty in the name of mankind.
It droned.
One moment. Beginning reprocessing.
It added a moment later. Ahsoka grinned.
What does it mean,
but then remembered its
reprocessing?
reaction to the clones from before and turned to face those which were present with her in the room. Everyone, I can't believe I'm saying this, but leave, she ordered. Everyone but me, Farnes here, and the skull. She clarified a moment later.
And she just did something that I'm actually surprised about. Mostly because droids are an everyday thing in Star Wars, but a lot of them get ignored really heavily, to the point where, well, hiding instructions in an R2-D2 unit was a good way to get them out, because they had no life signs. Well, that can't be important. I'm looking at you, episode technically 4. So yeah, explicitly calling out the skull as one of the participants, calling out the artificial life form, and considering them a life form at all, by even making that distinction, is kind of, to me, fascinating. Because I don't know if this is something Fan is interpreting, or if it's something that was actually as part of Ahsoka's character that I just missed because I am so far behind, it could entirely be that point. But just specifically indicating that she's holding court, essentially. Well, I've been watching a lot of random old TV shows that say holding court. But to have this kind of discussion and name the servo skull as a participant as opposed to just tech, that's just such a little thing to show Bofin is his own character. And yes, I am still trying to mentally stop myself from saying Boffin the entire time. I've failed multiple times.
Are you sure, Commander? Asked one of the clones.
Love that description.
Ahsoka shook her head,
Because no one else would
biting
say
her
that.
lip for a moment before affirming her expression. No, I'm not. Stay close to the door, but my plan won't work if you're in here with me. She told them, pointedly speaking in Basic. The clones nodded, leaving, one of them helping Fixer to walk as he limped out of the room, none of them going far at all. Why did you make your slaves leave? Farnes asked, confused, walking around the chair Fixer had been sitting in.
Goddamn, Farnes! Previous episode with them all going in and him shouting and saying everything he could, as angry as he could, to insult her as hard as he could. I honestly didn't think that was too insulting, because she kind of figured out this is a man dealing with trauma who you can figure out is going to happen. And then just that little, why your slaves leaves. The fact that that's his actual thought process, she's going to see it's his actual thought process, and he's just dropping it in there. It's like, oh, that's what you think this is. That's probably the absolute most damaging thing he could say to her right now. And he's not even trying to be angry. He's not even angry at this point. Yeah, they call them toy soldiers all the time, as being pointed out in the chat. But flat out saying, oh, they're your slaves. Because this brings up a lot of the issues where, are they? Kinda? Sorta? It's a technically very fucked up issue that I don't think was actually covered really well in the movies. And I have no idea if Clone Wars got into it or not, because it's a gray area of what the fuck are we actually looking at here. The more you think about it, the more fucked up it gets. And he's just throwing it in there. Oh, dude, I think just with that word, he's done more to actually insult Ahsoka, because it may or may not be accurate, than anything else when he was actually trying.
Placing it between himself and the Togrutan warrior defensively. Ahsoka shook her head, breathing heavily through her nose as she tried to shake off the spike of annoyance he had just driven through her.
Yup!
First of
And
all,
he got damage
they're
on that
not
one.
my slaves. I'm actually friends with most of them, so don't call them that.
I mean, technically, that's never been a requirement not to be exactly what he accused you of. And that's why it probably has a little more impact than all the previous things he said.
They are no more slaves of mine than you are a slave to your commander. Got it?
I mean, Commander? Maybe not. Commissar would probably say, yeah, you very much are.
She said sternly. The guardsman only
If
slowly
only because his
nodded.
commander was a pretty decent
As
guy.
for the reason they had to leave,
Well,
well, that's
sort of.
because Bofin there doesn't like clones, and I need him calm if I'm going to prove what I need to. She said,
Reprocessing complete.
The skull droned
What does it
right
mean by
after.
reprocessing?
Ahsoka sighed in some relief, tapping her foot impatiently. Time was ticking. It was constantly running out, and if they took too much longer with any of this, then their window would get dangerously narrow.
Because this is also happening at the same time. And she isn't even aware that talking about a time frame is completely accurate because virus bomb is about to drop. Oh, it's funnier to me because she doesn't realize just how accurate she is.
She needed someone who wasn't from her side to vouch for her and what she had claimed about her possible humanity, and that was something she hoped to find with the skull. Farnes, could you ask it to identify the people in this room? She asked the openly distrustful Imperial. Farnes narrowed his eyes at her, taking a moment to consider her request.
It's
before
internal
turning to the
databanks.
skull.
Oh.
Bofin, perform the ritual of diagnostic self-examination.
Also, I just realized something really weird about this image. The skull is giving creases here as if it was skin. That's weird. It's given eyebrows that I don't... Yeah, it's wrinkled in a way that skin would wrinkle, but I don't think bone does.
Have you undergone any recent changes? He asked it. Farnes, we really don't have time. Ahsoka began to say, but
This
was
is an
cut
important
off
one,
as
though.
the skull buzzed and beeped in response to the already voiced command. Bofin continued its nonsense noises for a couple of tense minutes then, Ahsoka standing and growing more
I mean,
impatient,
it was shot.
while
That would be a
Farnes kept his
change.
eyes locked onto her,
How much
as though
information
she
is it
might
giving?
leap over the chair between them in an instant and tear out his throat. Finally, the servo skull chimed and began to speak.
New energy cells detected. Substandard compatibility registered. Runtime reduced by 35 standard hours.
It reported at length.
What was his normal
Is there
runtime?
anything else different? Farnes asked, almost seeming disappointed that they had not rigged the machine to explode
yeah.
or lie.
Negative. No other alterations to standard program or hardware detected.
It said in response.
And admittedly, that's probably the best question he could ask right now, because if they're giving him a timeline, the initial assumption is they're trying to cover something up for you, and they changed Bofin. Which also is kind of a stretch because they would have had to have been putting on the show of not being able to start him. Unless they tried and failed and... Yeah. Overall, though, getting clarification from him is great. Unless they change his programming to make him not say he has programming changed, but...
Can you ask
That's
it
way too
now?
much crosstalk.
Ahsoka asked, tapping her foot more rapidly.
Meh.
Fine. Farnes relented after a brief pause. Bofin, identify personnel in this room. He ordered the skull. The strange construct bobbed in the air and then scanned Farnes, a bright blue light emitting from one eye and washing over him briefly.
Does he know from
It
previous
then
interaction
hovered
or
over
just
to
having
Ahsoka
everyone
and repeated
on
the
file?
process, making her squint in the bright blue grid of lights. Bofin then proceeded to hover back to where it had started and began to speak.
Human male. Farnes Elitan. Munitorum designation 21411. Service member of the 174th Vistellan Imperial Irregulars, Infantry Division. Service status, active.
It reported.
Unregistered abhuman. Ahsoka Tano, clerical data unavailable. Self-reported Knight of the Motive Force. Please present yourself to the nearest active Magos of your order to re-verify your identity data within the next 12 hours, or face holy reprimand, including but not limited to demerit, censure, demotion, corporeal punishment, and/or execution.
It finished.
Wait, it stopped on execution? Honestly, considering the level of punishment in the Imperium, I thought that would be near the top and then would it get worse. This is apparently a very low stricture for them.
Ahsoka tried not to act surprised by the list of possible punishments for not having her identification accessible to the skull droid, shaking her head briefly. At least...
The irony being, if this doesn't actually happen in 12 hours, he will probably get pissed. Or the equivalent of him being, I will no longer listen to you because you failed to update in 12 hours. Oh,
it
God.
had said the part she needed. Unregistered abhuman, Farnes said, shock blowing his eyebrows up as he spoke.
Affirmative.
It droned back. See? Said Ahsoka, uncrossing one arm to gesture to the skull. You were telling the truth, Farnes whispered to himself as Ahsoka continued to speak.
Is she, though? I mean, we know from outside context in Star Wars that most aliens that look human are mostly because the Rakatan Infinite Empire fucked with humanity really heavily over the course of hundreds of thousands of years, because there is a massive gulf of time in Star Wars that actually does make 40K look small. I mean, when you look at human timeline 40K, when you look at Eldar timeline 40K, maybe. Honestly, that's such a mystery. It could be hundreds of thousands to millions to billions of years. No one knows, because the people who were there are either dead or missing the memories because the Necrons fucked up. May or may not be intentionally fucked up, and that's the part I'm not sure about. And for all I know, the writers on 40K aren't either. Yeah.
That is why I was asking what that meant. Abhuman doesn't sound like an alien or mutant. On top of that,
Would it be a DNA
came
scan
to
to figure it
find
out?
me when you needed help. It ran from the clones, but it responded to me. She explained. The Imperial looked genuinely shocked,
When you
glancing between
told
the
him
servo
you
scroll
were
and
Magnus.
Ahsoka a few times as cogs turned in his head, grinding against his ingrained suspicion. I'm not a tech priest. I can't tell for sure you haven't tampered with him. He began
Would she
to
know
say,
how?
causing Ahsoka to groan loudly. Look, how else would I have found you? Why else would it have been there? And why are you alive right now?
And this probably goes as an even better argument from him, because Bofin has a shown history of finding people it believes can help to help out the person it wants to. Because it's how Farnus got involved in the first place. Yeah.
I haven't told you one lie this entire time, and here at least is some proof that I'm telling you the truth. I don't know what else I can do to... She began to rail, raising her hands into the air in a gesture of utter frustration.
Which
You
might
can
be more
take me to
convincing than
Nerva.
anything else.
She would know. She's a priest. She would know if you're telling the truth.
She wouldn't know about Nerva.
Farnus yelled, cutting her off, and Ahsoka withdrew a bit at that. Is she the one who was in the machine with you? She asked, voice more subdued, Farnus' face going pale at the sound, nodding to her question. She isn't going to be able to help you with that. I'm sorry.
Unconscious or
Ahsoka
dead?
said,
I don't
looking
think
away
dead,
somewhat as she
but-
spoke the words. All the blood finished draining from Farnus' face. Nearly his entire squad was dead. Maybe all of them by now. He couldn't accept that out of all of them,
Yeah. Unless you get off planet pretty fast, that'll be accurate.
Nerva would be the one that didn't survive out of all of them.
Especially after Fan built her up.
What did you do? Is she? Farnus began to
They
say,
dropped a CIS
hands
cruiser
on
on
the
her.
back of the chair tightening as he spoke. Ahsoka shook her head.
Actually, no, never mind. That would have explicitly been Ahsoka's fault, because she was one of the people helping take it down. So technically, you could blame her for literally dropping a spaceship on Nerva. Sort of. It wasn't aiming at Nerva, but close enough.
Quickly.
Actually, was it
That
aiming at
was
her
what
because
I
she
was
was
going
Walker?
to show you next. If you can order that, if you can make Bofin stay put in here, then I can take you to see her. She explained calmly, biting down on her own impatience. Farnus looked at her with hard, frantic eyes before slowly nodding and giving the servo skull a command to stay, which it took. Together, they both walked back to the door, opening it and stepping out. All right, hands behind your back, the clone from before said as they exited, but Ahsoka shook her head at him. Leave him. As long as he does not give us any more reason to, then I think we can leave his hands free. You won't betray that trust, will you? Ahsoka
give it a
said
minute.
to the clone before turning to address Farnus. He paused as if considering it, but shook his head. As long as you aren't tricking me either, then I won't try anything. He
She's
said
not to the best
her.
of her knowledge.
Ahsoka could feel that this was only a half-truth, but that would need to be enough for now. She needed his cooperation, and every little bit helped. She turned to look at the clones then, gesturing with her chin towards the door. Seal that room for now, and don't let anyone in without my say-so. Fixer, if you need to get some things out of there, just wait a while. I'll go in and get them later. The clones nodded, and together, they all began to walk back towards the medical stations.
Probably getting
The
Nerva.
tension was building in the Imperial,
however
and she
much
could
of
tell he
her.
wanted to run, not walk. And, as a matter of fact, so did she, though for different reasons. But desperation was not something she could afford to project. So, instead of speeding up, she did something else.
Walk slower.
So, are you going to tell me what an abhuman is? Ahsoka asked as they
Building
walked,
rapport.
nearly side by side, with Ahsoka letting him take a slight lead. Farnes did not respond right away, jaw tensing under his skin. Ahsoka began to puff out a breath as she perceived the silent treatment returning, and was at least somewhat grateful that he was not going back to repeating his name and numbers again. When he began to talk, she was more than a little surprised. Abhumans are human descendants, he said, sounding as though the words had to be forced out of him. They are usually people whose ancestors settled on worlds with odd gravity or weather. Some of them changed over time to be different, and...
Looking at you, Fenris. Hell, by Fenris standards, people in Star Wars are actually way too close to baseline.
And some made themselves different to survive. They aren't the same as us anymore, but they are human at their core. He explained. So, your machine thinks that I'm human too? At my core, I mean? She asked, genuinely curious. Farnes shrugged stiffly. I guess so. He said almost dismissively, his mind clearly in one place. And soon they arrived at that place, entering a room one floor above where Farnes himself had been tended to.
How bad shape is Nerva in?
What is all this? He asked, breathing the words out in horror and awe. He looked on, eyes wide, as he beheld the triple row of tanks which were housed on this wide floor, all full of a bluish, clear liquid.
Sorry, this is actually funny to me. The Imperium, whose entire motif is horrific technology done in the most disturbing way possible, because that's part of the Black Fantasy that was based on. The Mechanicum healing, which is just knives and cutting implements and chains and flesh peeling off because it's weak and just going completely disturbing in every way possible. And seeing tanks of Bacta is actually freaking him out. Just pointing out that he's from a completely different interpretation of what's normal, and for him, this is terrifying.
Liquid. And within every single one was a man.
Yeah.
All of them suspended inside the fluid by straps, hooked up into breathing devices, most seeming dormant and inert. They were all clones, he saw. All but one. Nerva! He cried out, rushing over to the tank which held his previous companion, shoving the medical droid that was beside it over and onto the ground with obvious disgust and fear. He backtracked away from it, almost falling over himself from the rash act and prompting several of the guards in the room to level their weapons at him. That being the case, he did not seem to care, falling back against the medical panel the droid had been operating, hands and back braced against it.
Oh, I'm actually surprised he hasn't said anything. If he wasn't so distracted by Nerva in the tank, suspended, I could see him also freaking out over the droid being the one doing it, because AI using alien tech seems like a great way to panic him even more.
Get that thing away from her! Get it away, Throne, damn it! He demanded, staring hatefully at the rigid construct as it began to try to right itself. Ahsoka ordered it away, and Farnes turned his eyes on Nerva completely, hands against the glass which separated them. She was floating within, nearly naked, stripped of her red robes, which had been replaced with far less modest white shorts and a bra. He was surprised to see how much of her was still entirely human.
Really? Oh yeah, because she was new.
Steel and flesh starkly displayed. What are you doing to her? He said, turning angrily towards.
How much would Bacta interact with the... Probably, Bacta doesn't regrow limbs. It is a miracle as long as the body's intact, because it needs to be as good as the plot is relevant. But how would it interact with the level of integration of technology in a Magos? Apprentice to a Magos, I guess. It probably wouldn't be as bad as a full Magos going in there, which might actually... It would actually be hilarious if it shorted them out, because it's mostly liquid.
Ahsoka. Let her out of that! She isn't someone you can just experiment on! She's a priest and a knight, she... He began to insist,
in a
his
healing
tirade
tank.
dying on his lips as Ahsoka shook her head in a mournful way. The former Jedi uncrossed her arms and walked up to the tank, looking at the unconscious woman within and laying her hand over the glass as well. That tank is the only thing keeping her alive, she said, speaking earnestly. At least, the living parts of her. We have no experience with your technology, and her mechanical parts were damaged in the battle. Right now, she's not in any immediate danger, but she is declining. She won't survive longer than a few more hours at this rate, and we genuinely have no idea how to help her. Ahsoka explained to him. Farnes turned away from her and looked back up at Nerva, His eyes burned to see her like this, to think that this was where and how she would die. She and Bofin, they saved me. Saved me and what's left of my squad.
You also saved her, too.
He lamented, eyes glistening before he wiped them with a forearm. He turned towards Ahsoka, a resigned slump in his shoulders, looking not at her, but at her feet, before he slowly pulled his eyes back up, fighting himself to meet her gaze. Okay, you made your point. What do you want from me? He asked, clenching his fists. What questions did you want me to answer now? He continued.
So I'm assuming this was the first one she was going to use to get him to talk. Now I'm kind of curious what the second one is probably threatening her life. Maybe.
Continued, a pit opening in his gut, even as he spoke. To his surprise, Ahsoka shook her head at him. I don't want anything like that, she explained. You have already told me enough. I'm not looking for intel or information to use against you. I just want you to help me end this battle, to stop the fighting so that no one else has to die.
Oh. One of those moments where you realize that even if she succeeds here, she can't win because the people in charge of both sides, sort of in charge of both sides, don't want that. I can honestly see sorry, I was going to misspeak there, blue team leader, I know what I said, being okay with a peaceful solution. One heavily favoring him, but technically would count as peace. Red team leader would definitely never accept that. There would probably be their own internal civil war based on that, but that's never happened before in 40K history. On the other hand, Palpatine is in charge. Yep. When I can honestly say, I think Wyler might be a more upstanding person. Yep. I give Wyler all the shit because he's basically a Chaos Sorcerer. I think he has more morals than Palpatine. I mean, they're fucked up morals and they're probably completely wrong and we'd be better off if he didn't have them, but they would count. Yep. So yeah. Ooh, yeah. Peace is never an option right now because the people running the show don't want it. And those who do want it on blue team side would never actually put themselves in a position because they know it would not actually work.
Said
because
the
of the
former
people.
Jedi. He blinked in shock.
Surrender?
Numbly
Never.
nodding his head for a moment before his face screwed up into a confused
Accountability?
mask.
Maybe.
Okay, but I'm not even a corporal. I can't order anything to happen. All I'm supposed to do is follow orders. Even if I believe everything you've said to me, and I don't, but even if I did, what difference would that make? He asked her, shrugging his shoulders helplessly. Maybe a lot, said the Togruta, stepping away from the tank. Could you deliver a message for me? To your commander, I mean, she asked, and Farnes nodded his head, but narrowed his eyes.
When did this happen? That's actually really important right now. If this is happening simultaneously with the previous episode, where they have the virus bomb essentially getting ready to be dropped because 1313 follows orders. I mean, I know it's not just him, but everyone from Krieg was there, or a lot of them were, so yeah. If it's happening at the same time, this wouldn't matter. But if this is happening significantly before, we know Ahsoka was there before the battle was joined in full. If this is happening before the assault, before the breach, before the commissar, what's his name, decided to admittedly follow orders of the highest ranked person around, then getting there might be important because Lazarus was not with everyone else at the virus bomb. It was his second, or I think it's his second. I'm actually not sure what positioning he would have at this point to even have one, but it wasn't Lazarus there. So maybe if Farnes was meeting with Lazarus, this might be a way to get people off, get a coalition victory going. But depends how much time they have to still work with, because that is very much in question now if they even have it.
If you let me go, then probably yes, he admitted. Well then, probably we'll have to do, said Ahsoka, removing a datapad from where it was clipped onto her belt and holding it out to him. I'm going to let you go back to your side, but with this. She began to explain, even as Farnes backed away from the tablet-like device. Take it. We don't have a lot of time. There's a column of Imperial forces approaching the temple grounds even now. It's with them that
Oh, okay, so that's the timeline. This is right before the battle was joined by the Imperials. Okay.
I want to leave you.
This is still when
They
the
have
Gene Stealer's
tanks,
making the assault.
Lots of soldiers, and they have been drilling through our backlines to reach the others of their forces. From that, we can determine they are probably going to make it into the perimeter to join the rest.
Which is what we
And
saw
soon,
already, okay.
Farnes looked up at her, face still confused, his eyes bouncing between the datapad and her eyes. Why not just drop me off at the front line?
You
He
die.
asked her. If I did that, you might get shot by one of our people on your return,
Or his own people, because it looks like a traitor coming back.
and I know better than to try to escort you personally into your own army.
Because she would definitely
I
be
don't want
shot.
to die any more than you do. Besides, I don't know what your side would do if they see you being returned by us. They might think the worst and shoot you themselves.
Yes,
She
yes.
said, Farnes nodding limply at that. This encroaching force should have the means to both protect you once you're with them and get you to where all the other Imperial forces are gathering. We'll have to move fast to get to the interception point before they cross over it. But once we do, I should be able to leave you there, and you should be able to join their forces without much trouble. Just another wounded soldier they found on the way to their goal. Once you make it into the
How many wounded
temple,
would be left
deliver this
alive?
to your commander. Make sure he reads it. She continued to explain.
Farnes doesn't know he needs to get this to Lazarus. Who would he go to, though? So if it's not Lazarus he goes to, because he wouldn't know to do that. Because he would not know about anything that happened. He would probably... It's not the commissar, because we know where he's at. It's not him. The only person unaccounted for that has any notable stake right now that was not involved would be Lazarus, at least in the military side. But technically, the Canoness is still on the field at the upper level, so maybe he meets with her? But she's also involved in a fight right now, so timeline might not work up.
Farnes squinting at the bright blue pad, and then looking back up at her, eyes still slitted in obvious distrust. What is that? He asked suspiciously. Ahsoka frowned but went on, answering his question.
The data
It's
pack?
a message. Terms for a ceasefire. Everything inside can be negotiated more with a meeting, but I figure it might be a start, she said, almost pushing it into his hands.
And she has no way to actually enforce that ceasefire if they agree to it. There's a lot of people who would listen to her, but Mace right now definitely wouldn't. Hell, I don't think he would at any time period, and that's probably one of his own personal failings. Obi-Wan, if for some reason something happens to Mace, Obi-Wan definitely would. But that involves a certain Inquisitor getting a really lucky hit on Mace.
No, I can't, Farnes said, backing away, holding his hands up from the datapad. Ahsoka sighed heavily, shaking her head in disbelief, gritting her teeth as anger filled her chest. Why not? If you don't deliver my message, then... She began to say, the Imperial cutting in before she could finish. It's not that, Farnes said, eyes still on the pad she held. That thing, it's not a message, it's technology, he explained frantically. Ahsoka raised an eyebrow marking at that, looking down at the datapad as though she had accidentally clipped something extra onto it, but seeing nothing but
Because
the
they
tablet.
would not trust in the slightest.
It's just a datapad, Ahsoka insisted, but he shook his head. How do I know that? Farnes blurted.
And I mean, admittedly, that's not even a bad point outside of this. Handing people random bits of technology to take back to their base is a great way to do horrible shit. Or to install Cloud Strike on it and do that same thing.
Sweat slicking his brow. It could be a bomb, or a mind control device, or even a
Actually, in 40K, that probably is a thing that could happen. More control probably could happen that way.
portal beacon of some kind. He
Because
said,
they are roughly
taking
that
2 more
size,
steps
yeah.
back from her and the device.
It's not even a bad
I can't
thought.
deliver that thing. Don't you have some pen and paper instead?
Ah!
He asked.
Do
Ahsoka
they
could
even
barely
have those?
believe what she was hearing, looking back down at the datapad with obvious bewilderment. Pen and By the Force, Farnus, even my Order's oldest records aren't recorded on pen and paper. No, I don't have any. Take the...
Ah! I just realized why this is absolutely funny to me. Because in the last Star Wars movie that came out, and yes, I'm acknowledging, I know people will be pissed about that, but I'm doing it anyways. It's not the one I had the most issue with. It involved, well, technically it's the second last. It involved Luke with a shrine of actual physical books. So either they're ancient relics or he had to transcribe them himself.
Datapad! Ahsoka insisted, stepping towards him, the Imperial matching the movement with another step back.
Pen and paper indeed.
No! Farnus shot right back. I'm no traitor! How do you not have pen and paper?
No one does.
That's suspicious! He almost yelled, and Ahsoka pulled the pad back with a hard sigh. The former Jedi threw her hands up into the air, turning around with a huff and striding to the nearest clone. Do you think we can find ink and paper quickly? She asked him. The clone shook his head and shrugged. Ma'am, we are on Axum. The last time anyone here used a parchment was before any of us were decanted. He said, making Ahsoka slap her hand to her face.
Oh, yeah, clone
tube. Was
tube.
she really going to miss her window over this hurdle after all she had already cleared?
On the one hand, yeah, for the want of pen and paper. On the other hand, even if she has it, it's not going to work. At least not right now.
Fine. Then do you have a parchment? She asked, turning to face Farnus now. The Imperial...
Would he actually have a copy of the Imperial primer? Being used for something useful for once, other than toilet paper? Dude.
The soldier shook his head at first, but then remembered something and shifted the motion into a nod. He reached down to some of the pockets on his pants and popped one of them open.
Do it!
From it, he pulled out a thick, long roll of dense paper, though it was only about as wide as Ahsoka's hand.
Is it toilet paper?
What is that? She asked. These are my prayer scrolls. Sometimes the machines need them, you know, to remind them of their duty and why we fight.
Okay, it's not the Imperial primer, which I thought would be hilarious if he had, but also, he, depending on who finds him, might get shot for writing on those.
These are blanks so that I can write specific litanies on them, though letting you use them might be a minor heresy. He began...
Yeah! Letting what they believe is a Xenos write on holy prayer scrolls, even if it's blanks. I mean... Yeah, depending on who he runs into, this could go anywhere from, oh, that you shouldn't do that, let's not talk about this, to, no, where's the flamer?
To say, muttering for a moment before Ahsoka stomped over to him and swiped it out of his hands. Hey! He said, but she was past paying attention to his complaints, leaning over a vacant medical bed
she might actually not know.
Some of the paper before placing her datapad beside it.
Oh God, would she need him to do this?
I have a lot to rewrite, and not a lot of time to do it with pen.
No, literally, if she doesn't actually know how to write. That would kind of be hilarious to me, if that's the reason.
She asked, and Farnus nodded. He reached down to his right boot this time and pulled free a half-crushed quill. The ink mostly gone from it and soaked into his boots and socks.
Pen and Paper Heresy.
He looked up at Ahsoka helplessly, holding it out to her. For the Force's sake! Ahsoka groaned, taking the quill from him as well and trying to scribble with it, finding it had no use left within it. Can someone find me something, some ink, please? Ahsoka asked the two clones nearby, who nodded and ran off to obey.
I'm sorry, this is hilarious to me.
The desperate Togruta looked around, thinking to herself. After a couple of moments passed, she found a small surgical dish, taking it and placing it beside the paper. She looked at her left hand with a sour expression, waiting for almost a minute before sighing in exasperation and biting into her own thumb with one of her sharp canines.
So she's literally writing her hope for a ceasefire into a prayer scroll in her own blood. You know, this actually would go pretty well with the sisters if they happen to find this. It would be better because they could probably scan it and find that it's abhuman blood as opposed to completely alien blood, which is still bad, but better than completely alien or machine oil.
What are you doing? Farnus asked as he watched her
even dries
drip some
black
of her blood into the dish. We don't have time. Besides the fact that your friend is dying, I need to get you into the column without them knowing I helped you. She explained as she dabbed the quill into it and began to write, eyes darting between the Imperial script on the datapad and the blank paper she began to fill with her best imitation. I'm not letting this chance slip us by, even if I have to be resourceful, she growled, continuing her frenzied scribing, tasting her own blood as she did. She unrolled more and more of the scrolling paper as she wrote, taking moments to blow over the red ink to keep it from smudging. To her mild surprise, the paper was oddly apt at absorbing her blood, and in a few minutes, she had scribed out the contents on the datapad as best she could manage.
I just realized what the prayer scroll is. It's literally a purity seal. So writing in blood is probably the most apt thing to do with it.
Making sure it wouldn't ruin the wording, she rolled the script back up and handed it back to Farnes. The imp looked at it dubiously before taking it and tucking it into a pocket on his shirt. All right, I'll do it then. I make no promises that they will listen, but I'll deliver the message.
Honestly, I don't think your side's the one that had the most problem with it. If it went to Lazarus, maybe. If it went to the Inquisitor, the non-Weiler Inquisitor, maybe. I don't think Ahsoka's side is the one who would accept it, though.
When do we leave? He asked her as he closed up the pocket. His eyes widened as she reached forward and took him by the wrist. Right now, follow me, said Ahsoka, beginning to rush towards the door and signaling to one of the clones on the way out to inform Captain Rex. She could only hope they were not too late.
Yeah! Oh. Wow, there's a lot of credits at this point. God damn, man. And Harkin just said it's accidentally the most fitting way to send a message to the 40K side. Yeah, it is. And I kind of love it. Unfortunately, I can't do any extra videos today. I was considering it, but between the late start and needing to check on my wife to make sure she is hopefully okay, I'm not going to be able to. So yeah, maybe next week. This week, I can't. Sorry, fans. Sorry, everyone. I can't do one more episode today. I do need to go check on her. I hope she's okay. I haven't heard anything. I haven't got any text messages from her, but I did start late today because she accidentally threw out or pulled a muscle pretty hard in her neck, and it's kind of been kicking her ass all day. She's got medicine right now, but I really want to go check on her. Yeah. Honestly, I'm only here right now so I don't bug her and hover over her more to the point where she was absolutely terrified. And by terrified, I mean of the fact that there's still heavy things in reach she can throw at me. And by terrified, I also mean me, not her. Yeah. My wife is tiny and cute, but also if she's enraged, she will throw things that are way too heavy to pick up and will damage the walls or me. Yeah. All that aside, though, I think she's doing fine, but I'm kind of nervous. So yeah, she's probably fine. I'm just freaking out. Yeah. All the same, fan, thanks for writing this. This was awesome and really love it. Next week, I'll see what I can do to do more, but right now, I want to see more, damn it. But also, I need to do a thing. Yeah. Thanks for watching, everyone. Next week, I'll probably try and do the normal time as opposed to the completely accurate time that wasn't late at all today. And this video definitely did involve anything about needing to edit out beating tech issues. Yeah, I'll definitely remember to cut that out. Seriously, this was awesome. It feels like it's setting up so many plates or plot lines for later, or just potentially bringing them together in ways that we haven't seen yet. And Oh, and Yang, I should bless my wife with holy cheese and love. I mean, you're joking, but frankly, if I brought her a cheese plate right now, that actually is a good idea. I need to go do that. Like, unironically, I should probably go do that. I'm going to go do that. You guys know the deal. There's a link below to the original video, which someone did mention. I got the right one linked for once because I usually fuck that up. But yeah, thanks for watching, everyone. I'll see you guys in the next one. And fan, thanks for writing this, man. I did see you had gone live recently, but I realized you were also going live with new stuff that I haven't got to yet. So I was like, oh, shit, I can't watch this. That sucked. Either way, I'll see you guys later. Adios.